everyone. Welcome back to a magnificent episode of Terran Tuesday. Hope you all doing okay out there in the big old world. We're back with Black Knight and R.H. Snow returning with a vengeance. Another magnificent topic to tear into as well. How are you guys doing today? Let's start off with you, Black Knight. How have you been since the last time we've seen you?
Yeah, I've been okay. Managed to do some more work on the new book, of course, and a bunch of edits as usual. I wrote a few poems, and I learned that I've been doing haikus wrong.
No.
And now I mean, not wrong per se, but in terms of original Japanese kind of style haiku, yeah, they're wrong. They're completely wrong. Like for the modified English style, they're perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's
We got a Moral Officer Grand joining us. Hoping you all have a good day. Thank you. Day is going good on my end. Just a tad bit groggy because I took a long nap. I woke up with a pug curled up on my neck. So that was interesting.
They're good.
They do that, them pugs.
Pugs are wild.
They're definitely a wild kind of breed. Very, very picky with the food, pugs. I didn't realize that, but very picky breed. But how are you doing, Snow? How's life treating you out there?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so like it's cedar season in Texas, and all the people suffering. They're suffering so bad. I don't know what it is about Texas and cedar, but there's something about it that actually makes it where it's like the most potent poison known to man. Where like everywhere else, you know, like cedar trees. Oh, they're pretty. In Texas, whatever it is, they just dump falling all over everything, and everybody's just miserable. So like we're all stuffy, and the wind is blowing, and it's been like blowing for like 3 days. And so we're supposed to be getting some major, maybe some pretty big storms coming in this week. So we're hoping it'll sort of ease it down. So I'm going to be working on that a little bit. So you may hear me pop off on and off again when I get my updates in. So I may have to update some other people about storms. We don't have any in the area right now though, so we're good. But we are looking forward to some rain so we can get that cedar out of the air, y'all.
You always have some wicked weather down there. I always realize that there's a weather update, something crazy going on.
A weather of doom. Doom.
It's like this. That's true. Literally, there's like 3 days that's called spring, and we've actually had part of that was yesterday. It was just absolutely beautiful. It was it was mild. It was like 80 degrees, and the wind was maybe 3 miles an hour, and the grass was green, and it wasn't so dry that everything could catch on fire.
And then the aliens invaded.
Yeah, 24 hours later, it's going down. So it's like. It really is. Texas weather's a little harsh, and so and the people are tough enough to take it. But it is wonderful when we get that, like those 2 days that are just so perfect. And we had that one, so we've already used up one of ours.
Yeah,
that's
Officer
funny.
Grand's doggy is also a Chihuahua mix. Yeah.
Oh, Chihuahua mix.
She's very adorable.
Yeah, we all have like Chihuahua mixes around here.
I had a girlfriend back in university, and her mom had a Chihuahua.
Did she really?
Yeah, she had it. It was like her dog hated her for some reason, and the dog constantly beat her, but the dog loved me.
Oh, really?
It's like she was like, why? I buy that dog like special dog food and clothes and stuff, and go with her to like special pet grooming saloon, like
Mhm.
for like but the dog hates her.
Oh no.
I just come when go to visit my girlfriend, and the dog is like, yes, it's like jumping all around and sniffing my hands, like licking my hands, and she's like, she's biting me, she never licks my hands, and I'm like, what? I don't understand. What are you doing? Like, what? Why?
Poor thing.
Yeah, animals can definitely be like that. Some of us are just blessed with the love of animals. Some of us have the natural sort of aggro where animals just say, "Yeah, yeah, I want to be your friend." And that
We are
actually,
yummy. We are yummy.
yummy, is that what they call it?
Yes, we're yummy.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. But that, I think, is a great segue directly into our topic today, because some of us attract animals, some of us sort of get animals to sort of just ignore us and things like that. But overall, I believe our life experiences, as well as how we refine ourselves over time, really lend to our own personal styles that bleed through our art, because that is what I believe literature to be is art. There's craftsmanship in there, indeed, where it can be sort of chiseled out of nothing, our stories, and refined. But our own personal identity that we bring to it, that's woven within it, that is our own personal styles. And that comes from a lifetime of experience, opportunity, gains, failure, and everything in between. And I, right now, while dealing with, or going back and forth with my own editor and sort of revising my work as I've been releasing continuous short stories once a week, I've been sort of witnessing my own style come to fruition, as I've only been writing for about 3 years now and been kind of just going at it and just refining as I'm going, and just sort of noticing the patterns and elements in between. And today's topic I've sort of chosen as a question that I ponder to you too, to dig into your minds. How did you sort of discover your own style, and what does it mean to even have a style for you, and how was that developed over time through your writer's journey? Let's start off with you, Black Knight.
Well, I'm not 100% sure that it's going to be interesting.
No.
Yeah, I mean, in my case it's a bit like more on the boring side, because at first I wanted to write something that, to a certain extent, evoked specific marks in different styles. For example, adventure on the high seas, and like action adventure from Raffaello Sabatini, and um, also the exploration of futurism through Jules Verne, and a few of the more like technological horror aspects of science fiction from a Russian author named Alexei Belyaev. If I'm not mistaken, I had a couple of his story collections,
Ooh.
books, I think. He wrote about some pretty interesting, and also scary aspects, which, for example, um, attaching surgically severed heads, which are kept alive by way of strange technology and chemistry and medical science to bodies of other people, um, because the heads had like they belong to people who somehow had more money and more influence, and they were like able to preserve to not preserve but they were able to afford themselves this procedure because it was like super expensive. So I really loved like the way all of these aforementioned authors uh, explored different aspects of science fiction, adventure, and action. And so in the beginning, I attempted to um, replicate them with my own way, my own thoughts, and I failed because it was um, I had to straight at first I had to try and just copy certain things, and the way I express my thoughts, I had to copy it, and then I had to like it took us some years before I could forge out a specific style, which is like the personal expression of the author on the page. Um, and of course, we're not inventing hot water. Uh, People will be aware that certain
Mhm.
way of thinking, a certain way of presenting your thoughts, it could be similar to what others had done back in the past, but this is inevitable. And so I began to gradually to refine this personal expression of mine, which consists in um, really fast-paced action, combined with um, elaborate descriptions and um, a way of pacing the dialogue in like which is somewhat reminiscent of what Sabatini did and Jules Verne did, um, which is especially Jules Verne. I found this like really amazing cadence of his dialogues back in the day. I'm sure that mine are nowhere near that, but I found my own pace in them, um, and especially when it comes to like a really descriptive dialogue, and especially like a longish dialogue, which I specialized in. It's one of the hallmarks of my work these days. So I don't know. I know it's boring, but that's
No,
all.
So you'd say dialogue is your signature. When people read
No, it's
your work, your
one.
one of
It's
your
one of
signatures.
the yeah.
Gotcha, gotcha. So when people read your work, that you probably get a lot of feedback from that as well, from your longtime fans. That is, you have published a lot of works and continue to do so. So there are probably a lot of examples of that, probably all over your Substack, I'd imagine.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Excellent. Now, R.H. Snow, what has your journey been like discovering your writing style?
Geez. Okay. So, first thing that I can say is that in order to discover your own writing style, you have to read. And I was a very prolific reader as I was and when I was younger. And in fact, I say when I was younger because right now, since my eyes are getting worse, it's getting harder for me to just sit down and read, which makes it really interesting. I still read, but I have to blow everything up so much it slows me down a lot. I learned to read early, and I was a speed reader, and actually could read upwards of about 1,500 to 2,000 words a minute as a child. So I was able to read books quickly. I could just absorb them. I was very blessed with that. And that does not mean you have to do it, but it allowed me to read a vast variety of different kinds of books, to read them and understand them. And I was given that opportunity to read as much as I wanted because I lived in a time when we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have other things. Also, I was a terrible athlete, so I didn't have like after school games or anything like that. I was very uncoordinated. I did try. I like to go climbing mountains and doing things like that. I could do stuff like that. Things where there's not a team and nobody wants to do it in school. I was really good at that. But I wasn't good at all the stuff where it took up a lot of your time after school. I was in band, but I wasn't in sports that much. So the things that when I had leisure time, I read books. And we of course we only had 3 channels on the TV also. So it gave me a lot of time to read books. So I made that deliberate choice. And one of the things that I actually thought about this today, before I saw your topic, was the fact that I was thinking about how I read such a wide variety of books. I didn't just read one genre of books. We weren't really married to genre at that point. We did have science fiction. Fantasy was still relatively new in that perspective. We had the sword and sorcery books of R.E. Howard and others that were more relegated to the adventure. They usually called it action adventure or fantasy at that time. And this is in the early 70s. And so when we were talking about those genres, they didn't have just a genre where you would go in and all you would do is hit that one genre. Usually you had a variety of books that you could choose from. We had a lot of books at home. We had a very large collection of books. We still do, about 1,500 books to 2,000, depending on where you find all of them. And so with those books, I was able to read things that I normally wouldn't get to read at that age. So when I was in 6th grade, for instance, I read the complete works of Mark Twain. I love Mark Twain, absolutely adore him. He is, to some extent, we've talked about it before, a fantasy writer. He develops one of the first isekai stories in Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. But he's more about his humor. And I love his inner voice. I was so much so that as I read him and as you go through his life and you read his work, he goes from that buoyant joy of Tom Sawyer to a very acerbic satire in his later years because of his broken heart and bitterness over the death of his daughter. His writing changes, but he still writes, and his voice changes with it. And so it was kind of hard to do that as a child and a younger teen, to read that and to watch this man go through this and his style. But it taught me so much about the expression of the narrator's voice. And then we have the narrator's voice of Tolkien, which at the time was just really gaining steam. Lord of the Rings was not yet a cult class. People had read it. And certainly C.S. Lewis was known, but it was something that people usually had to go looking for to find it. And so when I read Lord of the Rings, I was in 7th grade, and that trilogy, it's once again, the hallmark of it was the narrator's voice. And so we moved from that to Ray Bradbury, who once again has a very narrative style. When I read each of these authors, I could hear the narrator speaking. Anytime I read a work by Ray Bradbury, I can almost guarantee you that even if his name wasn't on it, I hear that voice. I know it's him. The same thing with Tolkien, hearing his voice. I recognize the voice of Tolkien. I recognize the voice of R.E. Howard, who I read as was an older teen when I was in my 18 to 22 years old. I read all the works of Conan the Barbarian. I was 17 books that were also done by later writers as well, and had the full set. And they tried to capture that style, but R.E. Howard's style is very specific. His voice is very masculine. It's very action oriented. It's not as dry as Hemingway's, but it has a lot of punch. I don't want to say the phrasing that he uses has so much punch compared to other writers in his era, in his period. And so hearing these narrative voices, going to Mickey Spillane or going to Earl Stanley Gardner, Edgar Rice Burroughs, each of these authors had a specific voice of narration. And one that we don't talk about as much, but Dragon Riders of Pern, Anne McCaffrey, her voice, her narrative voice is very distinctive as well. It's one that if I'm reading her books, she has a particular style and rhythm that I feel. And so when I read all of these works, they're in very different genres. I have hard science fiction, fantasy, fiction itself with Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn and Mark Twain, and of course then Robert Louis Stevenson with his great novels of Treasure Island and reading those stories gave me this love of the narrator's voice. And depending on the mood that I was in, I was able to capture that fairly well, even as a younger writer, but only in short pieces. And so I wrote, and also I was a huge fan of poetry. I love epic poetry, and especially The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Coleman, Longfellow, any of those old poets that were so popular at the turn of the 19th century, because I had a lot of books from that period. When I read those, and I started off with poetry, actually I started with it. That was my first real writing, was in poetry. And I have poems that I wrote when I was 6 and 7 years old, some of them multi-verse. I would almost always go to poetry and music before I would ever do writing. It wasn't until I was 12, 13 years old that I actually first started writing a short stories, and it was actually fanfic. We didn't have fanfic at the time. We had Star Trek, and Star Trek left us just basically dangling when it went off the air without warning, I might add. And just basically ditched us all standing there going, but there must be more. And so a lot of us who loved the genre started reading the books, which came out afterwards. And James Blish is the author of the Star Trek, some of the first Star Trek books that were actually written. And having read those, I was like, I love this. I love this so much that I wrote a fanfic of, and I hope I didn't Mary Sue it too much. I have no idea where it was. It was one of those things where if you're a 12-year-old girl and you're writing yourself onto the Starship Enterprise, how would you do it? And I wanted to be there so badly that I wrote a story about being on the Enterprise because I loved it so much. So that was my first real foray into actually writing fiction, as opposed to writing essays, or I liked to write essays about, the state of the world. I wrote I used my spelling words. How they would make you write sentences with the spelling words in them, so that way you would learn how to spell properly. Well, we had to write sentences, and I got really bored with that. So instead, I wrote an essay on why hippies are bad. Notoriety, because this was 1974, I think, maybe 73, as Vietnam War just ended, and there was a lot of hard feelings, and I was expressing myself in a manner that a 12-year-old would if you've seen the fall of Saigon and you felt bad about it. I was also pretty involved in geopolitical machinations at the time. I was pretty weird. I was a weird kid. I'll admit that right now. I was very strange. I basically was pretty much isolated. I was a nerd before they had a name for it. So we were yeah. It was kind of a hard life. I was sort of over there by everybody else was wearing rat pink t-shirts, and my mother dressed me in ruffled blouses. because my parents were older, and so I looked like I lived with my grandparents, and read a lot and had a lot of music, and I love classical music too.
Uh-huh.
So being that kind of person, my writing journey starts off with poetry. I go from there to writing fiction, and then I spend the next 20 to 30 years actually writing mostly essay and more journalistic work, commentary. And I won't go into where, but it was political commentary, usually under
Uh-huh.
and I would do that. I also did investigative journalism. And that's where we go into the investigative side of my life, where I actually ended up founding a private investigative agency, because I got to where I was able to go out and actually do these searches and do things and research topics at a time we didn't necessarily have the information online. And so I was an investigative journalist, more or less, for several years, and had actually 3 or 4 big articles that went out that were actually done as a freebie, more or less. I did it as a contractor, and it was picked up instead by other journalists who would write about what I had written, sort of in a secondhand way, and would reference my work. And it actually made a big difference in a couple of cases. So my work was so concentrated, and it because writing a short story to me is one of the hardest things in the world to do. I can tell you what I think all day long. Y'all probably figured that out by now. I can tell you my idea on something and what I think about this particular thing, and I can get a start and an ending to it. And
Mhm.
I loved persuasive speaking and all those things. And so when I would do it, I would write an article. It came second nature to me. Writing a story, though, to me was so hard. James, I don't know how you do it, because getting it distilled into that 6,000 to 10,000 words, getting it nailed down, making it interesting, and having this little arc of a scene that encapsulates this perfect moment in literature. And I loved short stories. I loved O. Henry, was one of my favorites of all time, was O. Henry stories. And actually Ray Bradbury wrote some very good short stories as well. But I just couldn't capture that genre. So I had never considered doing fiction. I
Yeah.
had never done any of that. And so it was, and of course, my story, that by the time I get to writing novels, I've already lived an entire life. I'm 57 when I first write my first lines for Watcher of the Damned. And I was, had gotten sick, and I said, I played all the video games I could possibly play. I was bored, and this story fell in my lap, and it was literally a gift from God. And I started writing. But the style of my writing changed, because I didn't sit down to write a novel. I sat down to write the first episode of a novel, and I called them episodes. And when I wrote it episodically, it flowed so well. It was incredibly easy to write it at that point. I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to start and then come to a middle and then have a finish. Instead, it was episodes, and they just kept flowing. Now, this was fantastic because I wrote a 6-book series, and then I put it all together all at once. I had, by the time I got finished, within 2 years, I had a 6-book series basically. And I had to take those building blocks of episodes and make them work as books, to where they had an arc and inner arcs and things like that. Because my family was reading it, and they thought, well, hey, that's, they wanted to know more. They wanted to see it. And I had other people that were interested. I'd say, okay, well, you know what? We'll just jump on it. And I didn't even bother trying to submit, because I felt like, nobody's going to take it. Nobody knows me. It's okay. And I found a consultant. I actually hired a lady named Melanie Callahan to help me. I said, what do I do? How do you make a book happen? And I mean, because I know nothing, absolutely nothing. And she was more just holding my hand and saying, hey, do this next. First, get this done, and then I'll format it for you, because I had the illustrations. And that was the hardest thing, was getting it formatted. And she helped me figure out, how do I need an editor? What else do I need to do? But that part wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was figuring out that there is an actual shape to novels, more than just episodes, because I saw this as a continuing saga in my head. And trying to shape it into a novel where somebody could pick up the book and read it, and it makes them want to read the next one, but it's not just an incoherent mess. And if you've ever binge watched a series and loved it, but it's all standalones, it'll feel like you're getting these things, but it doesn't quite tie together. That's when you see inconsistencies. That's when you see things pop up where it's like, well, the character was this way the first time. Now he's, completely different person over here. He's doing things I wouldn't expect. The best series have some cohesion to them. But standalones are great too. A lot of people write series where there's actually a standalone series. Spencer for Hire was one of those. He had a little bit of a continuous thread. I also love detective stories. And so we had this, in Spencer for Hire, he would have a standalone where you have a thing happens in this first book. There's a case, and they go and they work on the case, and then they close the case. The next book that you pick up, Spencer's on a completely different case, but you're picking it up for the characters, not because the storyline continues. Watcher of the Damned is so hard to write because it is one continuous storyline from the first words of the book to the last words of the entire series. Everything has to tie together. It all has to work together or it will not turn out. And it has to turn out a specific way. There is a thing that happens, not because I'm forcing it to happen, but because I saw the ending. It's like looking back on somebody else's life, and I'm looking at their life, and I see the first page of their life. They were born at this time. This thing happened, and these people met, and that's Watcher of the Damned, Transportation, Texas. And I know the last scene. I absolutely know exactly what happens because it's one of the first scenes I saw in my head, along with the first. Like I said, I wrote the first scene, and I saw the last scene. And so I have to have that happen. So I'm filling in these blanks. I'm writing and I'm discovering it as I go along. And so this chunk method of writing where there's an episode and it happens and it has its own little arc, but it has to tie in with episode 9 has to lead to, at some level, episode 56. And if it doesn't, if it's off even a slightest little bit, that inauthenticity is going to hurt us. It's a journey, and I can't just make it up in my head. I actually have to let it unravel. So my writing style has evolved from just me being a reader and loving the narrative voice to going through my own journey as a poet and then as a more or less an investigative journalist and commentator. And then when I finally got to that place where I was able to write novels, it demanded everything of me. It demanded all that I had. And finding my first voice in the book, one of the hardest things to do was to keep myself true to the narrative voice that I start with. There's a lot of humor in it. You can tell the influences of Doug Adams and Mark Twain. I think it's pretty obvious in a couple of places, especially it's a common thread throughout the book that seems to work well. And I think that's one of the things that we're missing the most right now, actually, in a lot of narrative voices, is that humor, the light, the moments of light and the dark, and the moments of laughter, of absurdity, the way that it falls. And so I think this is probably one of the biggest keys to understanding my narrative style for me, was that it can't ever be too heavy, too long. There's going to be some place where the ordinary intrudes and turns that situation into just the slightest little absurdity somewhere. There's that human element that makes it that you never forget who they are and where they're coming from. And finding that voice for me was exciting because I had never heard myself that way before. And it was thrilling. There's a narrator inside me that wants to speak. And I think that for every writer that we have in this group that comes in and listens to us, that you have your own voice, and it is important to practice. The Black Knight, he crafts himself. One of the reasons why, because he's multilingual, he's a polyglot, and so he has all of these different languages and he practices with them. But for a person who is coming out of the tradition of perhaps one or two languages, make sure that you're speaking in your own voice. How does your inner voice sound? It is shaped by the things you've heard as a child, by the things you read when you were young. That person is the person that will be the most authentic and will be the easiest to keep narrating, because you won't be afraid you're going to change it too much. Instead, it will just continue to be that narrative style for you. And when you have that inner voice established as a younger person, and then you practice it as you grow, by the time you write, you will be established in that language, just as you're established in your own home language, your own native language, the language that you grew up with. That's your narrative voice inside of you, is your native narrative voice.
Nice. Yes, there's definitely a lot of experience that goes into it, and you definitely have lived a full life, Snow. We've really been
Yep.
you always surprise me every time. There's like a bit more to the biography to add on to that as well. Do you find that your writing style sort of forges itself over time?
Yes, one of the reasons that I go back and there's things that I want to do. There's especially humor. And I say humor because it's not like they're telling jokes, but
Yeah.
setup of the scenes. It's how they interact. They really are like sitcoms in some ways. The interplay of dialogue is based on banter. That once again, you have to be exposed to banter to understand it. You have to be exposed to conversation to know what it looks like, what it sounds like. And so the rhythm of talk and the interplay of male and female and the absurdity that shows up there, I think, is the core of the humor. And so some characters naturally have that thread of humor somewhere in there, and they're easy to write. But it's easy to lose your narrative voice if you don't go back and check yourself. You say, okay, I want to write this way. I want it to sound like this person inside of me. You need to go back and read your own work. Things that worked for you, things that did well. Go back and read what you wrote. And in the case of Watcher of the Damned, it's real easy for me to do that because I can't go without reading what I wrote. I have to go back now and research my own lore. I had to do it again today because I had something come up, and I'm like, I've got to go back to book 3 to find this particular point that was revealed because it plays into that last scene, and I better get this right. So, like I said, about twice a year, I go through and I read the entire series from start to finish, which is a pretty big accomplishment because it's 1,000,000 words by the time I get finished. And so I'm burning through this thing, and I go back and I say, does my narrative voice sound correct? Do I still sound like the same writer? Well, some things can be better. Some things should get better. I should be honing my craft. I should be trying to make it myself a better writer. But I don't want to lose what worked. Once you find something that works, don't let it become refined out of you. It's one of the saddest things that we see when a writer comes out and they hit, and they have this great story that they've told, and then they come back and the voice changes so much that we don't recognize the writer that we're reading. Yeah. And it's a shock for people. Sometimes it's just because they switch genres. But in the case of, for instance, C.S. Lewis, when you read C.S. Lewis, you recognize his voice, whether he's writing his, screw tape letter, if he's writing his story, science fiction stories, or if he's writing his religious works. He always sounds like C.S. Lewis, no matter what genre he's in. And he actually wrote hard science fiction. What was it? This oh wow! It just slipped my mind because it's a Prometheus Award nominee, actually, I believe, this year for the finalist for the classic. And he had such a way of speaking that no matter what genre you're reading C.S. Lewis, you recognize him immediately. His voice is so perfectly English. I don't know how to say it. When I hear C.S. Lewis speaking, I'm hearing Western civilization talking to me. And so his rhythms, his writing, the way he evokes things, and the imagery that he uses, it would be such a terrible thing if he came in and just said, I want to write completely different. I want to write like Lord Byron or somebody else. If he came in and said he wanted to write like Owen Wister, who is a Western writer from the early, actually from the end of the 1800s, 1890s. And if he wrote like a Victorian writer, if he wrote like Edgar Rice Burroughs as an Edwardian, he would lose his own soul in that. So he had something that worked. For him to go in and deliberately change it, just to change it, might be a fun exercise for him. It would show his chops. It would show how well he did. But for people who are looking to read C.S. Lewis, they're not looking to read C.S. Lewis pretending like he is Edgar Rice Burroughs. If I want to read Edgar Rice Burroughs, I'm going to go read Edgar Rice Burroughs. I want to read C.S. Lewis when I pick up his book. I want to hear his voice. And this is something I think that we go back to, and we've talked about it before. When people read books, how to write, everybody, and I mean everybody, has read the Stephen King's How to Write. I
give up. I didn't read it. I didn't read the whole book.
And you've heard me just harp on Zen and the Art of Writing. I love Ray Bradbury's book on it because he tells you how to write like yourself. And he doesn't really give you, go do this thing. Here's this formula. Formulas are awesome when you need something that works for a format. The Save the Cat formula with 17 points or whatever, 17 points of how to make a story happen. That's awesome when you're needing to fit a story into a 30-minute, 1 hour format for a particular, show that you're trying to write. And you're trying to, it's a great way to start. When you're applying it to everything, it makes the stories predictable. You're not going to write Ivanhoe with 17 points. You're not going to write, Narnia with Save the Cat. And if you're reading just Stephen King's How to Write, you're going to be writing like Stephen King. Now, Stephen King's an excellent writer. He has made wonderful money and sold millions of books, possibly billions. But he's Stephen King. If I write like Stephen King, I'm just imitating him. I'm not coming up with something different. And maybe I have a different storyline, but the narrative voice will not exist that is mine alone. And so when we read, we expand our narrative voice. We teach ourselves a new language, but we shouldn't ever just hone ourselves into an imitation of another great writer. If we do that, the great writer that you might be, the great writer that you might be discovered to be, will never be seen because you're busy imitating someone else. We need to hear your voice when you write. When I pick up your book, I ought to be able to hear, oh, geez, this is what, Wrangler sounds like in his own head. It's always fun to do that. And I love doing it with Black Knight because I can hear you in your own head. I'm literally inside your head when I'm reading your writing. And your voice is very unique. I hear you in the rhythms of your speech because you are as English as a second language. The rhythm of your language makes it exciting.
It's my third language.
The third language. Oh, goodness gracious. You speak everything. Because of that mix, there's nobody that's going to ever write like Black Knight. They may try to imitate you, but you are going to have this unique voice that now has been displayed across all of these books. And your voice has stayed unique. It has stayed rhythmic in its own way. And your work with poetry has helped hone this into something that when I pick up a book by Black Knight, I absolutely know it's his. I could probably pick up one blindfolded. I could find him at this point because his voice is so unique and so distinct. Same thing with you, James. Even I'm surprised you said you were 3 years only. I thought you had been writing much longer than that. And the reason why is because you do have a distinct style. It reminds me so much of Tolkien if Tolkien was modernized. It is a sharper form. It's that Tolkien is a river that flows. So you jump in the river and he just flows down from the mountains to all the way to the sea with this rolling rhythmic prose and the sweeping lines and everything else like that. For James is like a brook that has little bushes on either side of it, and you bounce from this little scene here to this little scene over here, but the water still takes you there. And so there's a liveliness to your prose that is sometimes lacking in Tolkien's. That's not to diss him because he's very erudite, obviously, but there is a different rhythm to you. And so, but I think when I think of your prose, when I read it, because it is so evocative, it has this imagery and this beauty about it, but it's faster, it's lighter, it's bouncier. It takes me places quicker. And of course, part of that's your format. You have this short story, but that is that difference. And both of them are water. They both flow. They both have this beautiful prosaic motion to them. But yours is that little jump from place to place as it goes from rock to rock and little curve to other little curve down to this little pond down here. And finally we get to the ending of your story, and there's that picture that you created. So the ending's in sight. When I start off at the top of the hill with James's prose, I can see the ending at sight, and there's that little pond down there. With Tolkien, he's way up here in the mountains, and you don't know where you're going, and the keeps widening out and widening out until last year in the ocean of thought and storm and everything else. And with Black Knight, it's more of a long burning fire. There's always this spark in it. This is more about light, and I think this is the difference in stylisticness. Stylisticness, is that a word? Is that even? Can I use that? That's kind of like
it's already a word. Yes.
Stylisticness, yes. That fire that comes with yours is more like a fire moving through things. Water flows; it flows the easiest way, but fire burns, and it actually consumes what's in front of it. And when I read your words and I see this spark, it sparks off, and there's this little thing that sparks off. And like we start with Lily, for instance, in the first scene where she has the little watermelon patch and she's doing her little thing. It's always a spark, but it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows, and it spreads out from this one point. It doesn't take you necessarily linearly forward. It spreads into this area, and it grows. The flames grow higher. The intensity grows larger as we go further and further into your books. And so that's where we see that Black Knight heat coming in. Is what starts off with one little spark, one little animal trying to deal with life as it is, and the fire grows and grows and grows, and at the very last, it's always this giant bonfire. Everything's burning everywhere. But it's exciting and it's extraordinary. Stylistically, you two are so completely different because you both have a coat. Now, what you do have in common is you have cozy. You have these little cozy elements that keep it from being too overwhelming. As a result, where the fire is raging and the Black Knight's world is, everything is threatened and lives are on the line and somebody's, going to be tortured, but there's still time for bread. There's always time for bread and food. And James is actually the same thing. There's those little moments, the little places where the bed down for the night, where how the sheets feel, how things happen in your world that make it that coziness that grounds the entire thing. So whether it's water flowing or fires on fire, it's always going through the landscape of humanity. There is something human in it, and it stays grounded in that through comfort, food, shelter, the little details of life. And I think that's actually what joins you two stylistically, and probably brings us a lot closer than a lot of other writers, as that element of comfort.
Well, Black Knight, do you agree? What's your take on that one?
You have to balance stuff. As dumb as it sounds, perhaps I said it too blockily. But early on, I discovered that other authors, especially in the adventure books that I read as a kid, is that they always had this it's not just the cadence of it all, of the action, of everything, but they did have this balance between the the threats, the action, and the resolution of all of the action, and all, like the solving of the issues of like dealing with the threats and everything, but they always balanced it with the cozy aspect of, and in most cases like the normality of everyday life in their age. Let's say, for example, we had this harrowing boarding open like boarding battle between these pirate ships, these corsair ships, and this British ironclad, which happens during nighttime and during a storm, which it's not easy to board a ship in the day when the weather is okay, but imagine this in the night. And they back in the day they did not have like special devices which allowed them to see in the dark. So every cannon shot, every musket shot, like, and then after that, when they began to fight in melee, and the Corsairs lose, like the soldiers manage to defeat them, even though like they initiate the Corsairs initiate the boarding, and then it ends with all the Corsairs dying and just the captain surviving because he jumped into the sea, and he was wounded. He was heavily wounded, and he somehow managed to swim in this storm, while the soldiers are shooting at him, and he managed to swim to ashore. And in the next chapter, you have this like man who had just survived this most harrowing ordeal, and he's munching on, like, he manages to procure some fruits, like gather some fruits. He catches some seafood, and he's restoring his strength. He bandages his wounds, and he's resting somewhere, and the idyllic beach and like the palm trees and everything, and it's like the contrast between that and the brutal night battle in the storm, like where everything that surrounds you is death, pretty much. This is exactly what I looked for in my evolution as an author. And of course and it still is quite hard sometimes when I go with, let's say, humor, because humor is it's subjective in many cases. It depends on the culture, and if you miss the references, what's humorous for you and others who know you might be dull and even cringy for others. So yeah, that's one of the things that sometimes is hit and miss.
There's a lot of humor in your writing as well.
Yeah, I mean the hamsters, they have their battle jokes, the uplifted hamsters. So yeah, it's and when you consider the fact that I'm an amateur cook, I like including some recipes, some like foods, regional foods, unique stuff.
Yeah,
and that it's not just when I'm writing about that, it's not just the balance that I'm thinking of between the terror and the fighting and the wholesome and the cozy, but I'm actually one of the goals is to convey not just my love for food, but to attempt and to inspire the reader to maybe cook their loved, most beloved dish, or maybe look for something that something new that they would perhaps try and find to
Yeah.
their liking. Because this is one of the most, um, let's say, wholesome things for me, is to help the reader with some of stress, and increase the levels of enjoyment from what they read. Because uh, I mean, you read about, let's say, spaceships and people fighting against monsters, in they're using advanced technology, but on the other hand, when they gather around, it's almost like they are sitting around a fire, um, a bonfire, and they are like making marshmallows, or uh, s- making a stew, like a super simple stew or something, at least in like their variant of it, which is one of the things that I was able to replicate in my own style from the adventure novels. So that's part of my style.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of like, where the experience of life comes in. It can bleed through your writing, that personal identity. Um, and it's funny you say that, because it reminds me of cozy mysteries, because they
Mm.
have a lot that focus, like whole series that focus around like a cafe or a bakery, and then they may even release actual cookbooks
Mhm, mhm.
related to the series. So yours is like a kind of weaves in that coziness, is like a sci-fi cozy there. Almost like a sci-fi action adventure cozy.
Yep, pretty much.
And with that, speaking of styles, we have King Bob joining us, saying, "My writing style is you will enjoy it. You enjoy my writing style, or else." That's an interesting way to put it.
Smack
um,
it down, bro.
what was that, Snow?
Smack it down, bro.
There you go. Do you have a personal title for your own writing style? Do you have like something you call it, or is it just like that thing in the ether there, my personal style? Is that just it right there? That one's for whoever wants to pick it up.
Oh,
Let's throw at Snow. We're gonna throw that one at Snow.
freaking Bob to answer it. I guess for me, geez, I love Robert E. Howard's work because it's just so the
Yeah.
acting. I have different things for different chunks. I call them chunks. I don't know what it's called. It's not genres. It's facets of
Yeah. Well,
um.
let's put it this way. If somebody asked you if you had to define your writing style, how would you define it?
How would I find it? Like, you mean like compared to another person, or just define it?
Just define it, your own personal writing style. If it was a genre unto itself.
I guess it already is pretty much. So it's so weird. It doesn't fit into anything. Um, geez, that's a really hard question because it's like, how would you define it? Uh geez, they always say don't put your like name of Mark Twain. If Mark Twain married Tolkien and they had a baby, um,
Mhm.
that's the closest thing. It actually is. Because I wow. It's really hard for me to define myself. I can write it.
Mm-hmm.
I can show you. It's like trying to sing. It's like trying to explain the color red. Um,
Yeah.
for me, defining myself actually is just the the picture of beauty in a hard world.
Mm-hmm.
See that I guess that would probably be the defining element, the humor in darkness, the beauty in harshness, and light in the darkness. Is there's always that element there that when we look at scenes. One of my favorite scenes I ever wrote, actually, they are looking out over a pond in the town of Purgatory. And Purgatory is featured in books 4 through 6. They've come across this survivor town where it's just absolutely debauchery for everyone all the time, because they're just basically getting high, and that's how they get paid, is with liquor and drugs. But it's still a hard little frontier town, like so many frontier towns in the past. And our characters are emerging from a tunnel, and they're trying to come up on a scene. And as they come around this curve, the sunlight is pink overhead from this beautiful sunset. And it gently touches the trash that's bobbing in this pond. And as they walk up, and the waves are capping, and they can see, the bottles and pieces of flotsam and jetsam that suddenly turn beautiful in the sunset light, because everything becomes gilded with this rose gold glow. And you don't even notice it's trash. You just notice this incredible light on everything. And they're going through this particularly brutal time. They've just lost a character, and there's people have died. There's still beauty in the world, and they see it. It's part of the world they're living in. They cannot avoid it. And I learned this from my mother. She grew up in extreme poverty, said nearly died from starvation and the Great Depression, and was hungry a lot, sick frequently. Didn't get to go to school because she was busy picking cotton in the fields. She told me how beautiful the world was when she would be working outside and just miserable and hot and sticky, and people are screaming at you to get finished. And you still look up and the sunset is still beautiful, that the world is still beautiful to people who labor and who work with their hands, and those that have been sometimes cast aside by society as they are too impoverished to know what real beauty is, that they are working class people who don't know what literature means, or poetry, or music, art, dance. That's a lie. That the great civilizations of the world, that art springs from the workers, springs from the people who work with their hands, who create and make life and make bread and grow plants. They're the ones who create art and music and beauty. And it springs from them. That's where your folk music comes from. That's where the quilt that your grandma made comes from, that beauty there. It comes from that world. That's art. Just because it's not hanging in a painting in the Louvre doesn't mean it's not art. And her teaching me that there's beauty in everything, even in the greatest act of manual labor. It becomes an act of defiance to see beauty in the world of pain.
Wow, that was very poetic indeed. Black Knights. Would you be able to define your own writing style?
Hmm.
I got a dog chewing out a bone near my foot. Hopefully you can't hear him too much.
No, he's stealthily gnawing the bone. We don't hear
Excellent.
him. Yeah. So I would say that my style is like the characteristics of my style is first that balance that I managed to achieve after years of trying, between the all the action and the harrowing, problem solving, with the humorous side of things, and like the little joys of normal life that they somehow are able to preserve or replicate for themselves in the pauses between their battles, in between the battles, which otherwise they would not be seen. They would slowly descend into psychosis, madness. But first the balance, then my love for elaborate descriptive prose, which I am not quite sure that it's elaborate enough, but it is useful. It got to the point where it is useful, and it is not too long-winded. I was able to achieve again like a like I made sure to put certain boundaries on all of these descriptive episodes. So yeah, that's another part of my style. And finally, it is a lot of emotion that I was able to weave in even in the, and especially not even, but especially in the slower scenes where characters either speak or you, the reader, are exploring their inner monologues, where they touch upon an element of their normal mundane lives.
Yeah, I hear you. I was actually going through some of your work recently. I was hearing some of your short stories that you produce, and one thing that I've noticed is there's a touch of whimsicalness that
Yes.
almost is like throughout it as well, which is well accented with the very fantastic hard sci-fi universe you have created. And I think that's also an aspect of your writing, is this sort of fantastic whimsicalness about it as well. What do you think influenced that?
Oh, well, I think partially it was some of the fantasy that I actually read um, back in the day, and some of the fantasy games that I played, because they did indeed had uh, this aspect, this whimsical side to them, and I really like that. Um, it's another way to weave in some uh, like another balancing tool to use, especially with me, because I, that I write about various kinds of types of horrors. That horror is part of my work, perhaps not super heavy on the horror, but there is a lot of it. And so this is yet another tool to smooth things out. Otherwise, it will be a bit too heavy if I didn't have that. And it's also quite soothing.
Yes, you definitely got to strike that balance. I myself find that I add a touch of horror throughout my writing styles to sort of add those elements of thrill in there to sort of keep the reader on the edge. I think I started noticing that about my own writing when I was writing a short story called Glimmerleaf about a year ago now. But with that, we're actually closing in on the half-hour mark. So I'm going to go ahead and open the floor for you guys to share where people can find your literature, as well as some final thoughts that you want to share with people. We actually got a very, very congested chat today. We have Lily Fields shouting out D&D there, Dungeons and Dragons, which is actually a big inspiration for a lot of modern fantasy writers.
Oh yeah.
We also have Frederick joining us here. Giving a shout out to King Bob there. We also have our own Wrangler as well joining us in the chat. Very congested indeed, which is always good, and they're always talking to each other down there, which is what we love to see. So thank each and every single one of you for joining us today, and I hope it was a really great conversation to eavesdrop on there. But let's go ahead and open it up with final thoughts and where people can find you. Let's start off with you, R.H. Snow.
Oh, me. How exciting. I've got the radio going off in the background. I hear my firefighters are talking, so I'm actually listening to them. You can find me at watcherthedamned.com. You can also find me on Amazon.com by putting in Watcher of the Damned. Watcher of the Damned is currently a 9-book series, possibly at this point a 10 to 12 book series, because I just found out that I wrote 2 books instead of just 1, and I'm very excited about that part because I wrote so much that there are now 2 books worth of material. And it's a sci-fi Western saga. It is also an allegory on life and Western civilization and freedom. And if you love those sort of deep dive stories with complex characters and complex storylines, a lot of readers have compared it to Game of Thrones, except there's guns and shooting and people are a lot nicer to each other. So if you would like something like that, you can check it out at watcherthedamned.com or on Amazon under R.H. Snow and Watcher of the Damned. And I love each and every one of you. Go out there and speak in your own voice. Your voice is glorious, and I love what you have to write.
Excellent. All right. The Black Knight. What's your word for the people, man?
Well, as you know, and perhaps I've been repeating myself a bit too much, but if you do like an alternate history universe, which is quite different from our own, although still the same in the most cozy and wholesome possible way, Starshatter is the universe that you need, that you want, and that you would love to read and immerse yourself into. You can grab all the books that are so far published from the main series, which they are a total of 10. I am working on the 8th one. It's gradually nearing completion. It's like I'm working on the 3rd part of the book, the last part of the book. But you can find the 7 books that are published on my Amazon page. And you can also read many more stories and novels and novellas on my Substack page, theblacktight.com, where you can also read my poems and my haikus and a lot of my newer fantasy, exclusive fantasy books. So enjoy.
Excellent. Thank each of every single one of you for joining us. And that actually goes for our co-host here, finding the time every single week. We are in the 80s now. I think this is our 87th podcast, which is crazy to think we've done this 80 times in a row, more than 80 times in a row. But please, everybody, leave a comment down below. Give us a big old follow. We'll go ahead and say what is up. Share this with your friends and join us next week as we dig into even further mental expeditions into the minds of these magnificent authors. But with that said, we are out of here, everybody. We love you very much,
Bye.
and we appreciate you joining us. But